Damian Green had always believed that hard work would eventually pay off. Growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, he learned early that if he wanted something in life, he had to earn it. And that's exactly what he did. Through years of dedication, long hours, and relentless determination, he carved out a successful career for himself. It hadn't been easy, there were setbacks, obstacles, and moments where he doubted if he'd ever reach his goals. But he kept pushing, knowing that one day, his sacrifices would be worth it. That day finally arrived when he drove his brand new red pickup truck off the dealership lot. The deep crimson paint gleamed under the afternoon sun, bold and powerful, a striking contrast against the dull pavement. The engine's low rumble was like music to his ears, strong, steady, reliable. This wasn't just a truck, it was a statement. A symbol of everything he had built for himself. As he pulled into his driveway, Damian took a moment to appreciate the sight of it sitting in front of his home. It was more than just a vehicle, it was proof of his perseverance. Every scratch-free inch of it represented the long nights, the extra shifts, and the sacrifices he had made to achieve something for himself. But not everyone saw it that way. Karen Bridgewater, the president of the neighborhood's homeowners association, had always given him trouble. She masked her biases behind the HOA's rules, wielding them like a weapon against those she didn't believe belonged. From the moment Damian moved into the neighborhood, she had gone out of her way to make his life more difficult. Petty fines, complaints about noise that didn't exist, nitpicking his lawn while ignoring worse offenders, her message was clear. And now, she had a new reason to sneer. As Damian stepped out of his truck, he caught sight of her watching from her porch, arms crossed, lips pursed in disapproval. He didn't need to hear her say anything to know exactly what she was thinking. Damian simply smirked, gave his truck one last appreciative pat, and walked inside. He wasn't about to let her ruin his moment. But he had no idea what she had planned next. The next morning, Damian stepped outside, keys in hand, ready to head to work. But the sight that greeted him made his stomach drop. His truck was gone. At first, he thought he had parked it somewhere else, maybe down the street. But as he looked around, panic began to set in. There was no mistake, it had vanished. In its place, staked into the ground where it once sat, was a bright yellow sign with a single word scrawled across it in bold red letters, "Sold." Confusion twisted into anger as Damian scanned the street. Who would sell his truck? It was registered in his name, the title was his. This didn't make any sense. He stormed to his nearest neighbor, an elderly woman who often sat on her porch in the mornings. "Ms. Jenkins, did you see anything last night?" "My truck, it's gone." The woman hesitated, glancing around nervously. Then, in a hushed voice, she said, "It was Karen. She had some men tow it away." Rage flared in Damian's chest. His hands clenched into fists as his breathing grew heavy. He didn't even have to ask why. He already knew. Storming down the sidewalk, he didn't bother knocking when he reached Karen's house. He pounded on her door with enough force to rattle the frame. Moments later, she answered, still in her robe, sipping from a mug as if nothing had happened. Damian's voice was ice. "Where is my truck?" Karen took a slow sip of her drink before smirking. "Oh, that thing. I had it removed. It was an eyesore, and it didn't fit the neighborhood's aesthetic. Consider it a community service." Damian could feel his blood boiling. "You had no right." "I had every right," she interrupted, her smirk widening. "Vehicles like that don't belong here. And I doubt you got it the honest way." The unspoken accusation hung in the air like a slap to the face. Damian took a step forward, his jaw tightening. He knew exactly what she was implying. This wasn't just about HOA rules. This was about him. And Karen had just declared war. Damian's heart pounded in his chest as he stood on Karen's doorstep, his fists clenched at his sides. The smug look on her face sent a surge of fury through him, but he forced himself to take a slow breath. He couldn't lose control, not now. "You stole my truck," he said, his voice tight, barely holding back his rage. Karen let out a fake, innocent chuckle. "Oh, Damien, don't be so dramatic. It was a necessary action. The HOA has certain standards, and that thing was an eyesore." She took a slow sip from her coffee cup, enjoying every second of his frustration. "Besides, I don't recall seeing a record of ownership. Maybe it wasn't yours to begin with." Damien's vision blurred with anger. That was it. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was accusing him of stealing his own property. Without another word, he turned and walked away, pulling out his phone. He didn't bother arguing with her. He didn't need to. The law was on his side. Within minutes, he was on the phone with the police, explaining the situation. The dispatcher took his report seriously, and within 20 minutes, a patrol car rolled up in front of his house. 2 officers stepped out, one flipping through a notepad as Damien approached them. "You're the vehicle owner?" the first officer asked. "Yes," Damien said firmly. "I have the title, the registration, everything. My truck was stolen from my driveway. I was told by a witness that my HOA president had it towed away and sold it without my consent." The officer's expression darkened. "Do you know where it was taken?" "She claims she sold it," Damien said, jaw tight. The second officer let out a low whistle. "That's not an HOA matter. That's grand theft auto." They wasted no time knocking on Karen's door. She opened it with the same smug expression, but when she saw the uniforms, her face twitched just slightly, just enough for Damien to catch it. "Officers," she said, her voice dripping with faux politeness. "What seems to be the issue?" The lead officer wasted no time. "We received a report that you had a resident's vehicle removed and sold without consent. That's a felony." Karen gasped, clutching her chest as if she were the victim. "Oh, this is ridiculous. That truck was in violation of HOA regulations. It was abandoned." "It was parked in my driveway," Damien interrupted, his voice cold. "Where it was legally allowed to be." Karen's eyes darted between the officers. She was losing control of the situation, and she knew it. "I was acting in the best interest of the community," she snapped. "Ma'am," the officer cut in, "where is the truck now?" Karen hesitated, gripping her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles turned white. "It's been taken care of." That was all the officers needed to hear. "You're going to need to come with us for questioning," one of them said. Karen's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious." But as the cuffs clicked around her wrists, the fight in her drained away. Damien crossed his arms as he watched her being led to the squad car. But justice wasn't done yet. As Karen was taken in for questioning, Damien hoped that this would be a simple case of recovering his truck and pressing charges. But what the officers uncovered next turned the situation into something much bigger than he had expected. While running a background check on Karen, law enforcement discovered something alarming, something that had been buried in sealed records and old reports. Karen Bridgewater wasn't just a controlling HOA president, she had a history. A dark one. Decades earlier, she had been affiliated with several hate groups, including a now-defunct extremist organization. Old images surfaced, photos of her in meetings, posts she had made on anonymous forums, even financial records linking her to groups with discriminatory agendas. It all made sense now. The passive-aggressive complaints, the way she always seemed to target him specifically, the fact that she had gone so far as to steal his property simply because she believed he didn't belong. She hadn't just been a bitter old woman enforcing rules. She had been waging a personal vendetta against him. The next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with the news. Karen had been formally charged with grand theft auto, fraud, and property misconduct. But that wasn't even the worst of it. The Homeowners Association, now under scrutiny, was forced to review all of her past actions. Residents who had previously brushed off her behavior as strict leadership were now forced to reckon with the truth. A local news station picked up the story, and within hours, Karen's name was plastered all over social media. Footage of her being escorted into the police station spread like wildfire, and former community members began coming forward with their own complaints about her unethical practices. The HOA, desperate to save face, immediately revoked her position and issued a public statement condemning her actions. But the damage had already been done. Damien, meanwhile, was focused on one thing: getting his truck back. The police were able to track it down to a private buyer who had unknowingly purchased it under fraudulent circumstances. Luckily, since the sale had been illegal, the vehicle was returned to Damien without issue. As he ran his fingers along the hood of his red pickup, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief. But he also knew that this wasn't just about a truck. This was about something bigger. Karen had tried to strip him of what he had worked for. She had tried to erase his presence from the neighborhood. And she had failed. As he stood in his driveway, watching the sunset reflect off the polished red paint of his truck, he knew one thing for sure. This was his home. And no one, no matter how deep their hatred ran, was going to take that away from him. Karen Bridgewater's arrest sent shockwaves through the entire neighborhood. It wasn't just about a stolen truck anymore, it was about the truth finally coming to light. The woman who had spent years ruling the community with an iron fist had been exposed for what she really was. The HOA scrambled to distance themselves from her, but the damage had already been done. Residents who had once blindly followed her rules were now questioning every fine, every complaint, every so-called regulation she had enforced. Some of them felt guilty for not seeing it sooner, while others were just relieved that her reign of terror was over. Damien, meanwhile, wasn't interested in their regret. He had spent years dealing with Karen's passive-aggressive harassment, and now that she was gone, he was focused on one thing: making sure nothing like this ever happened again. He met with local attorneys, filing both criminal and civil cases against her for grand theft, fraud, and harassment. He also pushed for a formal review of the HOA's policies, demanding more oversight and accountability to prevent another power-hungry individual from abusing their position. As the legal battle unfolded, the media attention surrounding Karen's past only grew. Reporters dug deeper into her history, uncovering even more damning evidence of her involvement in discriminatory organizations. Some of the neighbors who had once defended her now avoided mentioning her name altogether, afraid of being associated with her downfall. But the biggest blow came when the court ruled in Damien's favor. Not only was Karen found guilty of grand theft auto and property fraud, but she was also ordered to pay damages for the emotional distress and financial burden she had caused. On top of that, she was permanently banned from holding any position of authority in an HOA ever again. When the verdict was announced, Damien felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Justice had been served. But this wasn't just about punishing Karen. It was about setting a precedent. This was a message to anyone who thought they could abuse their power to target someone based on their own hateful biases. A message that said, "You will not win." With Karen Bridgewater out of the picture, the neighborhood began to change. The once hostile atmosphere started to shift as residents became more aware of the problems that had been ignored for so long. Damien, who had once felt like an outsider in his own community, was now being recognized as the man who stood up against injustice and won. The HOA, under new leadership, implemented new rules to ensure that no president could ever act unilaterally again. Decisions had to go through a board, and any major actions, like vehicle removals or property fines, now required documented proof and multiple approvals. The days of Karen's unchecked power were over. But for Damien, the best part of it all was getting back behind the wheel of his red pickup truck. After weeks of legal battles, news reports, and endless discussions, he was finally able to take a deep breath and enjoy what he had worked so hard for. One evening, as he washed his truck in his driveway, Ms. Jenkins, the elderly neighbor who had tipped him off about Karen, walked over with a warm smile. "You fought back," she said softly. Not just for yourself, but for all of us. Damien chuckled, shaking his head. I just wanted my truck back. Ms. Jenkins patted his arm. Maybe. But you got a whole lot more than that. As he watched the sun set, its golden light reflecting off the polished red paint, Damien realized she was right. This wasn't just about a truck. It was about standing up for himself. And no one was ever going to take that away from him again.